Have you ever thought to yourself, why do I have such a hard time connecting with other men? Specifically, if you're a guy going through this journey, or maybe if you're the partner of a guy who's going through this journey, why doesn't my partner have more close friendships and really connect well with people? There's just a part of him that he doesn't really share. So we're going to talk about that today. Welcome to Beyond the Facade podcast. I'm your host, Luke Gordon, and I'm thrilled to have you join me in this space today. What we're going to be doing is diving deep into the trials and triumphs and truths of seeking authenticity. Becoming your true self isn't about a single action or moment. It's a relentless pursuit, a commitment to self that reveals the rich connection and meaning that our life has to offer. So whether this is your first time tuning in or you're a regular listener, know this: what you're building here goes beyond a conversation. You're here to challenge, to change, and to celebrate the incredible journey of becoming your authentic self. Because when you dare to show up fully, the rewards are immeasurable. So welcome to Beyond the Facade. Let's get started. Okay, y'all. Been thinking about having this conversation for a really long time in a podcast type format, so I'm excited to have it with you today. I'm going to picture you being there with all your comments that you'd have and trying to adjust those one at a time without actually hearing you. So if you could comment to this or throw some questions at me later after this, it would be great. All right. So what we're talking today about is connection. We're talking about belonging, being seen, all that kind of stuff. And we're going to talk about it through a hormone that goes through your brain. It's called oxytocin. So it's a bonding chemical or hormone, and it floods our brains with when we feel like love, acceptance, like we matter to someone. And it also ties us to someone and strengthens our connection with them. But that's like the healthy version of it. So now we're going to talk about the different versions from one end of the spectrum to the other when it comes to oxytocin. So let's give it a lens to look through, because whether you're talking about compulsive behavior, we typically in our groups go through dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. We're just going to be focusing on oxytocin today. So what we do is we go with all three of these hormones, neurotransmitters, these experiences that we have chemically. There's healthy versions of them and there's not, because we know chocolate cake, that gives you dopamine. It's healthy. Doesn't mean it's going to leave me with a good outcome. So we're going to talk about oxytocin, and we're going to compare it healthy sex versus porn. When I talk about healthy sex, that's like between two people that are connected to each other, that are aware of what the other person's experiencing. There's consent. There's, I want to see you, you want to see me. How do we feel about this experience? It's verbal, it's vulnerable, and it's an opportunity for connection. That's what healthy sex is. Okay, you get oxytocin, that chemical that floods through your brain when you have that experience, obviously, with sex, physical intimacy, but you also get that with porn. All right. So pornography, even though that person's not real, or sexual content in general, imagery, content that is designed to induce or create a sexual response in someone. Sometimes I get hung up on calling things porn when people are like, porn is, we got to give it something a little bit greater than just naked people on a Pornhub or whatever it is, website, hardcore pornography. It's bigger than that. So what our brain does is it goes, I'll take connection any way I can get it. Okay. As long as our brain registers, I'm seen, or I feel valued, or I feel heard, doesn't matter whether it's actually real or not. Our brain goes, okay, I want that again. I value that. This is what an unhealthy brain acts like. I don't need connection. I just need something that feels like connection. All right. And I've got a shortcut to that. So what's really cool about our brains is they're very efficient, extremely efficient. Basically the shortest distance between those 2 points, our brains get to. And it figures out how to become more and more efficient every time. So porn is a shortcut to intimacy. Porn is a shortcut. And also unhealthy versions of sex is the same thing too. I can think of many of the partners that I work with who one partner will be like, man, that was really The man that I work with was like, "We had sex. That was awesome." And she's like, "I didn't want that. I'm appeasing so he won't be a jerk, or I'm appeasing so they won't be a jerk. I can check that off my list." And he's just happy that it happened. So brain just needs whatever it feels like in connection. If we compare healthy sex versus porn, the problems that it creates when it comes to oxytocin is it doesn't give us an opportunity to really learn what closeness and real intimacy feels like because it gives us a shortcut. And that shortcut is a really warped way of thinking what connection really looks like. And what we know is really healthy intimacy, vulnerable, psychological, spiritual, all these type of intimacy all exist on the front end due to some type of, I'm going to use the word conflict, which is too extreme, which is not being afraid of conflict, being willing to see somebody else where they're at that is not the same place that I'm at. All right. And being able to be present with that person. Healthy forms of oxytocin is that being able to be seen and heard and feeling like I belong because I fight for that and I work for that. And with many of the couples that we're involved with, we talk about the healing journey being leaning into that conflict. That's not the fighting with each other, but it's the seeing things differently and fighting to see the other person. And that's where connection really looks like. So when men start to experience oxytocin at healthy levels for the first time is actually in a lot of the men's groups. And it's so cool. Like, you men that are listening to it, you know what I'm talking about. And maybe you might not agree with me, but this is what seems the feedback I get from men is they're like, intimacy. Yeah, that exists between a man and a woman. No, it doesn't. No, it does not. Intimacy exists when you're willing to see somebody else where they're at. And some of that intimacy takes place inside of that group. So what they'll do is they'll come super vulnerable. Like, I don't want to be here. What are we even going to talk about? Do I have to share my experiences? And they come to group and what they do is they're extremely vulnerable. And they show up and they answer the questions, they check in, they're real. And then men start to see them. And when they're seen, they go, whoa, this is different. Because I thought if I shared these parts of me, nobody would accept me and nobody would like me. Intimacy, oxytocin, high levels of it. It's fantastic. And these men are just surprised at the experience that they have. So I want to tell you about what an experience that I had with oxytocin and what connection, what it looks like, and what we can create for another person, and what I thought about in family of origin when I thought about oxytocin for myself. For those of you who are maybe older, I'm not older, but maybe a little bit. So before there was something called Mary Kay, at least in my world, there was something called Jaffra. I don't know if you guys remember this at all, but yeah, my grandma sold Jaffra and it was Mary Kay. And I remember what my grandma would do for me. It was the coolest thing ever. Get chills thinking about it. When I would get hurt, I grew up on a farm, southeastern Idaho, and we'd play rough. Must have got hurt often. And I remember when I would get hurt, I knew where I was going to go. And I was going to go to my grandma, and I knew what I was going to get. She was going to say immediately, she was going to say, "Oh my goodness, bless your heart," is what she would say. And I'll just meld over her, be like, "Oh my gosh, grandma's got me." And she would say, "Okay, let's go into my," I don't remember what she said, but it was like, for me, it was her Jaffra room where she kept all her stuff. And then she had this ointment, a little Jaffra with, I don't know, looked like some kind of lotion. And she'd find out wherever I was hurt and she'd put it on it. And then she'd acknowledge what I was experiencing. And I was just thinking about that, like the oxytocin that existed in that experience, that connection of my grandma seeing me where I was at, noticing it. And it was a lot less that she was fixing it with Jaffra, because I can only imagine what Jaffra actually did for the many different injuries that I would have had. But what was healing was as being seen in my hurt. If you're the partner who's been hurt, who's been betrayed, I recognize this is really triggering, this part right here. I am so sorry you've been hurt by your partner, and that is heavy. And what I'm thinking about with these men is when you show up in group and you show up and you say, with your vulnerability, sharing your emotions, talking about your experience, going to your shame and saying, "Hey, I don't think I'm enough. I I don't feel like I'm enough." And then you expose the things you've been doing, that's pain. When somebody else sees you in that pain, that's connection. And that connection is so important because what it does is it exposes an opportunity for me to have a relationship, not with just other people, but a relationship with myself because I see myself differently. So that connection that happens is within me. So so I see myself differently. What I also want to note here is because of the amount of pornography that I consume and the amount of one that I watch other men do, is this part of their brains turned off of being able to want to be seen. I can think of many men who their spouses are just like, can we just have connection with each other? But really with just people in general, wanting to have something. And here's the deal. His he doesn't have that need because it's already being met in another part of his life. When you get pornography, you don't have to lean into needing to be seen. Because when you consume it, that part of your brain goes, and this is so crazy. It's not crazy. It's so interesting, fascinating. When you get that part in pornography, you go, okay, I do feel that part of connection, even though it's not even real, even though there's literally not a person on the other end. And it's so hurtful for both people, specifically hurt for a person that got betrayed because they're just dying for it. They're just like, please be connected with me. I want all of you. Give me all of you. And they're kind of like, I don't, you do get all because they don't have the capacity to even understand what that looks like because they don't know how to fight through it and fight for it. So, anyway, I get a chance to watch these men show up and show parts and pieces of them. And the oxytocin part of the journey is so important. Learning what that, taking risk. I was actually talking to one of my clients earlier this morning, and we were talking about being honest and having integrity. And they said the real opportunity in the honesty isn't just for your relationship where you show up and you say, "Hey, here's me," and that's what they're asking for is real and honest and truth. And then you give it to them and your partner goes, "Oh, okay, there's truth." And that's not something they're used to getting from you. And the connection that can happen after a long period of time staying consistent with truth, that is an opportunity. But the main opportunity is that I show up and willing to be seen and risk that rejection. And then what I do is I go, how do I feel about myself? I'm worth it. I value myself, and putting it all on the line and going, what will that other person do with this? And that's it's so crazy because what makes a best friend a best friend? A best friend isn't a best friend because of the good experiences. Okay. That's easy to have with anybody, going and having an amazing experience with somebody. What makes a best friend is they saw you at the worst. They saw you at your low. They saw you in your rock bottom. And what did they do? They said, "You're not facing me. I'm here. I'm present. I'm going to stay with you." So I'm going to speak to the men for just a second. It is not your partner, the person you betrayed's job to show up for you and to show support for you and just be unfazed in you being real and open about your experience. That is not their job. They get to experience those things. But there are other people in your life there is an opportunity to lean into that with. And that's my invitation is to find those people and to have those conversations and feel all of the feelings associated with that, the fear, the discomfort, the Brene Brown talks about the vulnerability hangover and seeing what that feels like. It's a unique experience. It's a rewarding one. Kind of maybe it's a true thing to say, but it's kind of addictive. It's addictive to get with real vulnerable connection. So anyway, just wanted to share that stuff with you as a part of connection. Hey, thanks for joining us today. If this is something that you connected with, I'd love to meet with you more and talk about it. So what you can do is go to chooserecoveryservices.com or check the show notes. And there what we can do is set up a quick conversation to meet. Thanks so much for listening to Beyond the Facade, where we unmask the authentic self.